Lovely? That's so much nicer than anything I would ever do to get your attention.
Gave me this idea. I don't know if people remember.
Ruth Strevler? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so welcome everybody to our workshop. Some people were here yesterday, some of you weren't. Those of you who were here yesterday have heard the introduction that I'm about to give. So just go get more food if you need it. And definitely eat up all the food because the food needs to be eaten. So for those of you who don't know, this is Alice Pawley. She is an associate professor in the School of Engineering Education and an affiliate faculty member in the Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies program and the Division of Environmental and Ecological Engineering. All of this is at Purdue. She earned a Bachelor's of Science in Chemical Engineering from McGill and a Master's and PhD in Industrial Engineering, both from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She was co-PI of Purdue's advanced program from 2008 to 2014, focusing on the underrepresentation of women in STEM faculty positions. She runs the Feminist Research and Engineering Education program. She received an NSF Career Award. She wanted me to make this shorter and I refused, by the way. I was like, I gotta talk about all this. This is so cool. Anyway, an NSF Career Award in 2010 and a PCASE, which is the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers in 2012.
The important thing about that was that I got to meet President Obama.
That is an important thing.
That was the most exciting thing.
I bet. All right, so, and she helped fund, try to say that 3 times fast, and grow the Peer Collaborative, a peer mentoring group of early career and recently tenured faculty and research staff. My favorite bit of information that I found on her website is this quote, in my second year graduate school, I took a women's studies class and my mind was completely blown open, all caps. So I won't yell, but you know. The course was focused on science epistemology, and suffice it to say that my whole perspective on education, on engineering, and on women's place in engineering was transformed. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alice Pawley. Yay!
Thank you so much.
Let's see. And I'll give
We
you
have
that.
a little technical moment here.
Right. Okay. Very good.
Oh wait, I can put it on this side today. I have a lapel. Okay. Hi everybody. Nice to see you. My name's Alice. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm super excited to be here, and I'm so glad that so many of you have found time in your extremely busy days today and in general to come and spend some time here with me to think about social justice and engineering. I study how gender and race are baked into engineering educational structure. How many of you were at the talk yesterday? This is not to out you, it's just give me a sense of like how much is repeated. Okay, good. Can I also get a sense of how many of you are students of some sort? No students, okay. Oh yeah, a couple students, all right, good job. How about those of you who are staff not related to teaching? Okay, great. How about staff or faculty who do a lot of teaching? You can have multiple categories, so I'm going to ask about research in a minute. Okay, and how about staff or faculty who do a whole lot of research? Okay. Okay, right, so it's a mixed bag, but that's fine. I'm excited. So I'm here because I use feminist and critical race theory to think about engineering and engineering education. Those are not ideas that are often brought together, but should be. And to think about why engineering education remains so pale and male, in William Wolf's words. And I try to connect that to social justice efforts, right? So in the talk yesterday, I began with a land acknowledgement. And so those of you who were here yesterday, you are old hat at this. So I want to begin with a land acknowledgement, particularly, I mean, I try and do this more frequently. I was just at a conference at University of Oregon where the school there that was hosting the conference does this at the start of meetings, of courses, maybe class periods. It was at the start of many of the conference sessions. It seems like a good way to start a talk on social justice, especially considering all the art that we have on the walls over here. So what this is 3 different sentences. So I would love to have 3 different volunteers who would be willing to read a sentence at a time for me. Do I have a brave volunteer? Thank you. Would you read the first sentence for me?
We acknowledge and assert that the land upon which we are meeting is the original homelands of indigenous peoples whose rich knowledge and lifeways are present and deeply connected to this land.
Thank you. Do I have another volunteer for the second sentence? John, and then I will come to one of you for the third sentence. Thank you.
We recognize the many indigenous people who claim what is now Colorado as their territory, including the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne.
Thank you. And then one who would like to read the last sentence?
Sure.
Thank you.
We recognize that we are guests in this territory, and with that understanding, we remember and revere the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this land on which we gather.
Thank you so much. So this is from a broader land acknowledgement that the Indigenous SIG at AERA brought to the organization, the AERA organization at last April's meeting. And it feels important in the context of social justice to acknowledge that we're meeting on land that was forcibly taken and from which we continue to benefit by ignoring that fact. And so it felt disingenuous to fail to do that. Thank you, everybody. So I want to give you a centering moment. I lied. I don't have a slide. I forgot a slide for the centering moment. I want to give you a moment to settle yourselves. You're all coming from different places on campus, different parts of your morning, different things you're already worrying about after the workshop is over. Like me, I'm worried about catching my flight. I admit it. And I would just like to give you, 15 seconds of sort of thinking about what you want to get out of this workshop and why you're here. Okay, so I'm gonna time it. Okay, thank you. That feels so long to me, and it was 15 seconds. Something I try and do at the start of my classes to acknowledge that people are coming with different worries, and what can you do to sort of help them put that aside for the period of time that they're with you in class. So now I would like to just spend a moment where you introduce yourselves to your table, who will be your partners in crime for the next few, however long you're able to spend. Maybe you know each other, maybe you don't. So I'd share your name, where you are on campus. What are your sort of social justice aspirations, and what do you hope to get out of today? And I'm going to lurk around, and then I think I'm going to invite a couple of people who are brave to introduce yourselves to the whole group. So I'll just give you a couple minutes. Go for that.
I work with these as well, and basically the same thing, but moving it from making faculty think that they have to be inclusive to making it a natural thing for them. Like, oh, I must think about this, and it becomes more of a natural act for them. That's what I want.
My name's Amy Name. I'm also in the Trafficking Center.
We met you, and now you were wearing a different dress because it was a different day, but now I have linked you. Okay, go ahead.
I did a commitment.
Right.
I am really excited to be here for a couple of reasons. One, I am interested to hear what the conversation at Minds is around efforts of broader participation. And then I also am really excited to start thinking about how I can help and play a role in
You keep going. That's fine. There are other folks. Keep going. Or have you all gone? No. Okay.
My name is Chinju. I teach ethics, also Chinese philosophy, ethics of technology, engineering, science, and social sciences. So the reason I'm here today is I'm really interested in knowing how to actually design learning activities that involve social justice by global studies class, which I try to incorporate issues such as patriotism. Last week I talked about like immigrants, refugees. I want to learn techniques can make safe bodies on top, and also students can be more engaged. In fact, 2 students left when I was talking about this issue last week. I was talking about the rights of refugees, why people from developed countries have obligation to help people from these countries, and I basically talked from a very philosophical perspective. It's not very much engaging.
Right. And
so they left.
That's fascinating. But I can do things that are riskier because if feminist theory is coming from this man, they're like, really? You think this is important? Well, yeah. And so I can take more risks and get away with things that people, a female colleague would probably be called on. And that disparity is, of course, disturbing in and of itself. But it gives me a window to open up some conversations that might not be present otherwise. Yeah. Yeah, it's also different because the way I might answer some questions or the case studies I might bring might be different than the ones you might bring, and that brings just a different perspective. And the students are in your class; they're thinking about sustainable design, and so and you're in that same framework, whereas I'm coming in from a different framework. Seeing how that fits.
But then
Stakeholder engagement.
Perspective that I can take, ideas that I can take back to the present.
It's amazing.
Inclusion and access.
It's wonderful technique.
Our focus has been very
Most of us have done this one.
What is your role in that?
A single story about something. I'm
sorry?
What is your role? Like, how have they divided everybody into groups?
They have divided
Whenever I bring this
by
that opens up the story.
So right now I'm
Different ways of thinking about that
so
story.
each group, one's in the faculty group, there's a student group, a group that comes to the training center that are dealing with questions at our level and our experience. And as we move into the second year of the process, we're going to start making headback.
I'm going to give you about 1 more minute, so make sure everyone has had a chance. If you need 1 more minute.
Well, you don't just want to retain
So what they are is to design with students, person students.
very well.
So they have a specific target person that they work with specific needs.
Well, formerly I followed academic work, but I teach
So the first semester is the design part, the second is the design part. Somebody that they can go and talk to, whatever their current tools are.
Yeah, right. I think that's on
She's CU Boulder, she just teaches. Nope, she's graduating. Oh, she's graduating? Yep, she's postdoc. No, she's, well, she might be adjunct here, but she's taught the class here one other time for us, so this will be the second generation. But she's
Okay.
here with us.
Maybe I should change.
Keep her on your radar. She's very, very
Thank you, everybody. It's good when conversations are so good you don't want to stop introductions. That's awesome. Bodes well. Are there some brave souls who will introduce themselves to the whole group to sort of show the different interests that are present here? No.
No eye contact.
No eye contact, right. Awkward, like I'm just going to pretend she's not going to call on me. Thank you.
I mean, many of you know me, but
Yeah.
I'm Katie Johnson. I'm in electrical engineering, and I have been a part of 2 now NSF grants kind of related to this area. The first one was integrating social justice into engineering core science class, intro to feedback control systems, and we found that some of the most successful outcomes were when we considered social justice elements in the problem definition stage and helped students to kind of see where all this technical stuff that they solve later on actually fit. And now we're extending that into additional classes, including Stephanie's class here. None of my other class collaborators are here. Con is another collaborator on this project. And at the end of this portion, we're hoping to have ideas from the workshop that will actually help to further inform people who want to do this kind of thing in their class. So I guess stay tuned, and maybe I'll get a list of people who showed up today so I can send you all personal.
There you go. Don't leave without signing up. All right, thank you.
But that's still a year or more away.
Thank you. Another folk, someone else, some brave soul. Chin.
Okay, so my name is Chin Zhu. I teach ethics, Chinese philosophy and ethics of technology in humanities, arts, and social sciences. The reason I came here today is I really want to know how to design student-centered active learning activities that can engage students in discussions of global ethical issues, including diversity, inclusion, and social justice issues. Because when people talk about global ethics, basically it talks about the interests and rights of all people considered. So I actually took Alice, and last week I taught a section on some of the controversial issues in the U.S., including patriotism.
Patriotism, yeah.
Immigrants, and also refugees. So two of my students left when I was talking about it. I mean, showing resistance, I mean, is actually good, because that means the students feel like it's a problem, but the problem is that how to engage to even include these students.
Right. Right. So I'm hearing issues of both content around social justice, and I'm also thinking about pedagogy around social justice, right? Yeah? Maybe one more person, Dean?
Do I have to say what I said in my
No, do whatever you like. There is no, I'm not going to come after you with some stick if you...
I'm new here. I'm the Division Director of Engineering, Design, and Society, and with our division's faculty and our allies, who are very well represented here.
That's awesome.
We want to build an engineering program with social justice at the core.
Nice.
Period.
Yeah, very cool. Maybe a person from this side of the room? A brave soul. Thank you.
So I'm Carol Smith. I'm the university librarian. This is my beautiful castle. So
it is beautiful.
I love when people visit my beautiful castle. Libraries are community platforms. And they really are the academic heart, the academic salon of a campus that belongs to everyone. And so we are having some very deep conversations, not only at our academic library, but at academic libraries throughout the state and even beyond. I just came from a Grand Junction visit last week where we were meeting with Utah librarians who are very engaged in how to make sure that libraries are supportive and welcoming platforms for our entire community. And so we are talking actively about diversity, about inclusion, and specifically about social justice and how to put that into action, going beyond words into action on the ground, so
nice.
That libraries can lead in this regard.
My mom is a faculty member in Library and Information Studies, was retired now at Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsin.
Yeah, and she wrote a book, did write books, but she wrote a paper in Library Quarterly called Hegemony's Handmaid.
Ooh.
Yes, I come from good stock. I know. Thank you, everybody. I just wanted to sort of sense, sometimes in my classes I have the person to whom you introduced yourself to introduce you as it were, so that changes how people listen. It changes also the possibility for, you can sometimes hear from more people because the listener is maybe more succinct than you were when you first introduced yourselves. But also this is an opportunity, I don't get to hear from everybody, but at least I hear from some folks, right? So what brought me here? So I have come to see, especially in light of recent national events, maybe, I'm coming to see that the core goal of my career is to really help people see engineering as more inclusive, engaged, and socially just. And I'm constantly looking for more ways to do that. Someone went through the book alarm, right? And particularly more ways that I can layer that in. So through content assessment, pedagogy, but also moving out of the realm of my classroom into engagement in how engineering education is structured in a college level, at a university level, and at an institutional level in the context of higher ed. That is to say, not at Purdue, but in the US, for example. So I'll note that my career goal talks about social justice, not about diversity and even diversity and inclusion. And so for those of you who came to the talk yesterday saw this image, which has had various instantiations. People have seen it in other places as well, right, where equality is providing the same resources to everyone, even if they have different need, whereas equity provides people with different needs with different resources so that the outcome is the same, right? And I thought maybe that I had reached a perfect language, a perfect term, equity. That seemed better. And then I saw that the author had added something where we took away the fence and called that a form of liberation. So I invite you today, for the time that you are able to spend here, to do some imagining what might seem more like the liberation frame than some of these other frames. In part because it may feel impossible, unrealistic, unreasonable to think in this frame. But Bell Hooks talked about from center to margin. She talked about how the margin of a group is actually what defines what the center is. By defining the edge of what you think of as acceptable, by moving that out, you shift where the center is, right? Just by imagining that. So I invite you to do that today. So I teach 3 courses at Purdue. I teach Engineering 132, Ideas to Innovation 2, which teaches design, working in teams, and MATLAB to first-year engineering students. Are we having technical issues? Do I need to do something?
Gymnastics. No, they're just running out of power.
Oh, a constant problem for us all. I teach one section. Sometimes I teach 2 sections at once. Not at once. One after the other. There's sections of 120 students that I teach in teams of 4. That is to say, 30 teams of 120 students. I also teach a graduate course in the history and philosophy of engineering education. That's an intro course to our PhD program in engineering education. And I have been teaching that off and on since I started at Purdue. I co-designed that with Robin Adams, Brent Jessic, and Carl Smith. And I also teach a grad course on race, class, and gender in engineering education. That's a sort of upper level, graduate level, it's like an elective course for graduate students who are interested in doing research on usually gender and race. And I'm teaching those latter 2 courses this term, which is to say Thursday and Friday of this week. I'll have to figure out what that's going to look like, maybe on the plane. But in the race, class, and gender course, I'm using a textbook by Patricia Hill Collins and Surma Bilge called Intersectionality. This is a new book. It's published in 2016, I want to say. And I talked a little bit yesterday about Kimberly Crenshaw's definition of intersectionality. So we're going to do some theory first. Prepare yourselves. I know lots of you are looking for tips and tools. I hope we will get to those things. No, we will. I've planned it in. But some theory will help. So yesterday I talked about Crenshaw's definition, which talked about how you can't, 2 things. You can't understand any dimension of social identity without understanding in the context of other dimensions of social identity. You need to bring all of those social identities as best you can into some kind of analysis. And the second thing is, it's really hard to do that, and intersectionality involves trying to understand the systems that make that difficult. Okay, so there's an issue of power relations as part of that. Collins and Bilge use a different definition, of course, based on, involving Crenshaw's work, where intersectionality is an analytic tool that examines how power relations are intertwined and mutually constructing. I wanted to start off with that because I think it's important for us, those of us who are committed to doing diversity and inclusion work, really embrace and wrestle with the fact that single issue diversity thinking does not work. We should not be doing that. We should really be embracing the fact that at the heart of racism and sexism and homophobia and classism is about power, about a group exerting power over another, about a group exerting oppression in a particular context over other folks. And that at the heart of them, understanding how those dimensions, how racism and sexism and homophobia and classism and whatever, is xenophobia, choose your category, they all inform each other in terms of how those work in society, right? So understanding them together is critical. And so how do you do that? We have women's resource centers and minorities in engineering programs. We have infrastructure that categorizes things separately. And we have social movements that have sort of seemed to categorize things separately. But I think the intersectionality tool really helps us embrace that those things are intertwined and messy, and that's valuable. Okay, so let's see. So there are 3 things associated with intersectionality I want to tell you about. The first have to do with their sort of 6 sort of qualities that people who are doing work in intersectionality, that work tends to share. It's not a set of categories where if you don't tick off all the boxes, it doesn't count as intersectional. It is just sort of a pattern that the authors have noticed. So the first is that they tend to grapple with social inequality and move through seeing social inequality as a single issue lens, but instead comes to see how social inequality is based on interactions between different categories, right? The second one is about power relations. So we understand through a lens of mutual construction that racism and sexism gain meaning in relation to each other. And we can analyze things through their intersection, right? Understanding gender and race together. And then across different domains of power, which I'll talk about here in a second. Relationality. So this is an effort to reject either or thinking or binary thinking and really embrace an both and thinking. So it's less about whether somebody fits in a particular box, but thinking about the problematic bounding of that box, for example. Does someone count as a diverse student, whatever that means? Again, not E.E. Cummings here. Somehow that's code for something. But do they tick all the boxes? It's problematizing that, right? Problematizing those boxes. They understand social context. When examining different power relations. So you contextualize your argument based on the relevant social context. So we might be thinking about engineering education here at Mines, or we might be thinking about it in Colorado or in the United States. I gave a talk at an international conference at the end of July. There were folks there from Australia and Sweden and other places, but I'm trying to pick places far away from the United States. Canada, not that far. I'd say as a Canadian. So putting our analyses in context, right? And then the last one, no, I lie, second to last one, that it is super complicated to do this. And all of these different features, these different dimensions of identity, of things like racism and sexism and homophobia, those are all intertwined. And intersectionality is a way of understanding that complexity, right? And really embracing that complexity. It's challenging for many of us who are engineers who are like, what is the problem and where is the dotted line to the solution? Part of the difficulty is that it is complex. And the last one is social justice. So this is not required. It's apparently contentious to include in the definition of intersectionality. But people using intersectionality as an analytical tool and people doing social justice work as core to themselves, those are often overlapping categories. Okay. So that's the first sort of characteristics of intersectionality. Chin, we have a handout somewhere, right?
Yes.
we can start putting that on people's tables if you would be so good. So I've written that out on the handout. And we're going to talk a little bit more about power relations. I said this was a key thing. Let's talk about what domains of power are. So I'm giving you a frame because we're going to sort of dig into the practicalities of the frame shortly. So they list these 4 different domains of power, also listed on your handout. The interpersonal domain, which is thinking about how power relations are related to people's lives, right? How people relate to one another and who's advantaged or disadvantaged within social interactions. So really thinking about the interactions between instructors and students, between students and students, between how students relate to peers outside of a class. All of those would be within the realm of interpersonal domains. Disciplinary domains. This is not like, are you a chemical engineer or a mechanical engineer? This is like discipline as in punish. Okay, so how different people find themselves encountering different treatment regarding which rules apply to them and how those rules will be implemented. So I have, all of these are quotes from the book. I have the sources on your handout. The definitions are drawn straight from the book. The third one is cultural domains. And so this has to do with how ideas are used in the organization of power for providing explanations around social inequality. So I might think about Serena Williams and how in the domain of sort of sports, that there are rules about what constitutes fair play and professional conduct. And as long as punishment is seen within the realm of fair play and professional conduct, then the outcome must be just. And how that is being problematized right now, right? So that's a cultural domain. How is that image of fair play, or we might think in engineering, that we are a meritocracy and that people have talent and that talent is rewarded through good grades. How is that maintained through the cultural domain of power? Right, and the final message of that social inequalities that are fairly produced are socially just. And then the last one is structural domains, how institutions are organized and structured, how intersecting power relations of class, gender, race, nation shape and the deinstitutionalized. I'm going to start that over. This is like my jam too, like, okay, how institutions are organized and structured, and how intersecting power relations of gender, race, class, nation shape that institutionalization or organization, right? So how is it that, for example, engineering education is something that happens predominantly in higher education, that it has certain characteristics situated in higher education, that there are degrees that are engineering degrees or not engineering degrees. I actually have a bachelor's degree of engineering that is separate from a bachelor's degree. It doesn't matter. It's better than the wedding announcement that was in the newspaper where they thought a B-Eng was a Bachelor of English. Nothing against a Bachelor of English, I just don't have one. So that's like structural things, right? So this is the second thing. So there's the structure of intersectionality and its different characteristics. And then there's these different domains of power to think about. And then the last thing I want you to think about is something they have a whole chapter about in the book, which is like the relationship between critical inquiry and critical praxis. Can someone tell me what praxis means? Anyone? No, I really wrestled with praxis too, actually. What is the difference between practice and praxis? So I think they're talking about intersectional inquiry as separate from praxis, which I will describe here in a second, but that they should benefit from informing each other. So academics engaged in intersectional inquiry inside the academy, sort of problematizing how classrooms are organized or whose domains of knowledge count as valuable, methodologies, theories, and so forth, how they relate to social inequality. Whereas praxis is more about the ways that people, either as individuals or as part of groups, produce, draw upon, or use intersectional frameworks in their daily lives. So this gets operationalized as the academics doing the thinking and the activists doing the doing, and that those are two separate groups. But they are not really two separate groups. That folks who are doing work in the academy are also engaging in changing how people think on a day-to-day basis, we hope, right? And activists can also contribute to the academic knowledge of what it means to do intersectional work. So they're advocating for the use of theory in the sort of informed practice of one's day-to-day life. And so that's why I think I wanted to bring this up here. I wanted to share some theory, some theoretical frameworks with you, so that then, as we look at how do we actually engage in the classroom, we have some theory to connect it to. Okay, so I see this as a form of critical praxis. So we're going to spend some time in that space between inquiry and praxis to try and figure out ways to make our classrooms or our programs or our, whatever the space is that you bring to this room more socially just, and acknowledging how difficult that is, right? And hope that through both engaging with it and realizing how difficult it is, we come to a better understanding of the concept of intersectionality itself. So that's the hope. So we're going to do a little activity. How many of you, has anybody heard of something called serial testimony? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Have any of you heard of a woman named Peggy McIntosh? Okay, Peggy McIntosh is a scholar who, I cannot remember the name of the center. She's like the Center for Women out of Wellesley, I want to say. But she's extremely well known for her work on privilege, particularly developing an idea of the invisible knapsack. So you may have come across that there's you can look online for a sort of checklist of various different ways that she as a white person does not have to, that she has a bunch of different privileges that she walks around with every day. And that there are other privileges that have to do with people who are identify as heterosexual, as cisgender, and so forth. And so there's different ways to show what privilege is experienced like, okay? Using this metaphor of this knapsack, which you carry around all the time with you. Okay. But she has developed this pedagogy, which I love, called serial testimony, really drawing on the idea of sequential, but also listening for truth. Okay, so we're going to do this now. I'm going to give you the rules first, given the whole disciplinary domain of power. That there's a short, she calls it the autocratic management of time in the service of the democratic distribution of time. So there is going to be a short time frame, a minute or two, where, or we're going to pair up. Let's make sure that everyone, let's see, we have odd number there, but I think we might have one odd number, but that's okay, I'll pair up with somebody. We will pair up, and in those pairs, there will be a question for each person to discuss. And the listener is exhorted to not engage in any kind of like nodding or saying mm-hmm or any mode, but just listen for the entire time, whether or not your partner is talking. The partner does not have to talk through the entire period of time. You can just sit in silence. That's allowed and invited, okay? So you're not supposed to interrupt with questions. All that stuff that shows that you're like doing a really good listener, you're not supposed to do any of those. You are just supposed to sit there and listen. And notice how difficult that is. Notice how difficult that is. You are supposed to concentrate on what your partner is saying. And when your turn comes, you are supposed to engage directly with the question rather than trying to compare yourself with the other person. Okay? You're not responding to what they say. You are just offering your story. And again, notice how difficult that is. So you're not supposed to refer to what somebody said before you. You're supposed to stay within the time frame. And in doing so, we're going to do a little sort of Donald Schoen here of reflection in and on action. In the process of doing it, what can you notice about how that feels, what it feels like to do this? Okay. So the reference is down here, but you can actually just Google Macintosh and serial testimony. I think it's on the Teaching Tolerance website that the SPLC puts out. And so here's the question. Recall when you were a student. We're going to do this twice, 2 rounds. Recall when you were a student. What is a story of when you felt like you fit? I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. So you can choose your favorite story. And now I'm going to see that we have pairs all together. So I'm going to do, again, I'm going to choose geographic pairs. So if the two of you could pair up, Maybe the two of you, the two of you. John, would you cross tables here? The two of you, the two of you. The two of you, Chin, I'm going to take you, I think, as the odd person out. The two of you and the two of you on each side. That would be fine. And then Chin, we can sort of go around the front here. No, he's not on display. No. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to give you 2 minutes each. And I will ding the ding at the end of 2 minutes. And then the job is to switch. And then we will have a short reflection. And then I will give you another question. And we will do it again. OK? So and I got to make sure that even though I'm talking with Chin, that I set the timer. Are there any questions? Do you feel like there are rules that you're afraid of breaking? All right, let's go. 2 minutes.
Sure.
Here, why don't we sit on the floor?
Okay.
Okay, do you want to go first?
Because
you had
go first.
So good question. So I did not have the 20 seconds to think about it.
Okay. So I can probably go first.
That's okay. I think that I'll choose a time. I'll choose the time when I was a graduate student and I took this women's studies class. And I had this sort of, they call it the feminist clique, where I suddenly had language to talk about these things that I had been feeling, but didn't know that it was that there was a broader way of talking about it, that anyone else had been thinking about that. So I felt all of a sudden that there was that I was tapped into something bigger than just my own experience. And every time that I have sort of connected with the feminist science community, I feel like the work that I do has been valued, that even though I am this odd duck of an engineer, that I have something to contribute, that in fact, and I have something to learn, rather than being the only person in the room that has anything to say about that thing. So it was a form of intellectual connection in a way that I hadn't felt with my chemical engineering courses or even my industrial engineering courses. That's time.
Okay.
Pause. That was 2 minutes. I saw some nodding, folks. It's hard, right? It's hard. So now let's switch. 2 minutes with your partner. I mean, whoever hasn't spoken. Okay. Okay.
Very hard. Okay. So I'm going to share with you some experience when I came to the U.S. As a visiting student, and also later as a full-time student. Every time we talk about philosophy, talk about education, there would be sometime people call me out, asking about, oh look, so what does the Chinese perspective look like? So sometimes there as a kind of example showing there is some sort of diverse discussion there, right? Not only dominated by the Western perspectives, but you have kind of non-Western Chinese, like Confucian perspective. Even I didn't know anything about it. Didn't know anything about Confucian ethics at that time, so I forced myself to learn. So then I learned the more I learned, the more I feel more fitting into the context. I thought that was kind of a very interesting experience fitting into the context. I was forced to be, I was placed by some sort of external expectation by non-Chinese people that I should know about Confucian ethics, although I didn't know. And I learned, pushed me and forced me to learn something about Chinese philosophy, Confucian ethics, and I realized every time I would expect others to ask me questions like that. So what would Chinese people think, or what would Confucian ethics say about this? Something like that. You did very well.
Well, we're not done yet.
We're not done yet.
Oh,
Okay.
it's got 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, well, I'll go.
Okay.
I'll go. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, folks. So think about your experience as the speaker. What was that experience like for you? Awkward? I don't know who said awkward, but can you say more?
Oh, it felt like I was kind of interrogating, because I was just sitting and staring and trying to really listen but not make any body language.
Oh, okay. So that's as the listener. Did I say listener?
No, speaker.
Did I say? Okay, I got confused. So let's focus. I'm going to come back to you then for listener. So speaking. How did you feel? Yes.
With all respect for you, speaking into the void.
Yeah, there was nothing necessarily coming back.
I know you were listening, but it's different than when you get some feedback on.
Yeah. Right. You had a hand up.
I was going to say it was kind of two things at once. It was nice to just be able to talk, but it was really strange. I didn't know if I was boring her.
Yeah.
If she was interested or if she agreed or not, and it felt like there was just something missing.
Yeah.
I guess.
Okay. Thank you. Other here, and then I'll come to you.
I go with that as well, saying that it was nice to be able to talk, but then not be talked over, because in the society that we live in, somebody's always ready to interject and to talk through and to, but this with me, and it was like, no, this is about me right now for a minute, 2 minutes,
Yeah.
minute and a half, because we actually just sat for about 30 seconds.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so again, the dual nature of it as a speaker, there's a vulnerability, almost a confessional aspect to speaking without the supportive feedback you normally get in a conversation loop. But also there's something liberating about being able to just have a little mini confessional.
Thank you. Yeah.
I felt very self-conscious, so I didn't feel the liberation, and I don't know if it's a projection or was actual, but I, as speaker, felt discomfort from the listener and the constraint of not being able to provide that normal dialogical interactional support.
Thank you. Yes, and then I'll come here.
As the speaker, I was missing that cue of whether or not I should stop talking or continue talking. So around
The cue was the ding.
at about 20 seconds, I was like, am I done? Am I getting close? It's like,
Very anxious about the time.
right. You usually have some sort of acknowledgement that, I'm interested, continue talking, or I've got other things to do, and there's not that. So.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yes.
I would say like the first minute felt good, and then after that I was like looking for feedback. I was like, I wanted to stop and say, you know what I mean, or did that ever happen to you, or what do you think? Like I was kind of looking for that dialogue after about a minute.
Thank you.
Serene looked incredibly bored.
So
that was kind of weird to speak to someone who doesn't showing any emotions whatsoever.
But they were making eye contact, right?
Yeah, barely.
Okay, so this is interesting, right? How do we express culturally that we're listening? How is there a relationship between speaker and listener, right? So then as listeners, how did that feel? What was that like?
So one of the things that I noticed, because Mel and I talk a lot about teaching, we were talking about teaching and learning here, she kept looking away. Like she didn't have eye contact with me. She would
as the speaker. Yeah.
When I was listening, she would look away.
Yeah.
Frequently.
Yeah.
And I thought, she doesn't do that when we normally talk.
Yeah. I had to shut my eyes. Like I was like looking off into the trees and like I had to focus on what I was saying and not think about what my listener was saying. Like I shut my eyes as the speaker. Other comments about the listener? Yeah.
I felt being constrained to not move. I put more concentration on not moving and not responding than I did listening, though I did what you said.
Yeah, yeah. You're very self-conscious about your response. To stay.
Self-conscious about following your rules.
That's right. Peggy McIntosh's rules. Peggy McIntosh's rules. Maybe one more person as a listener. What did that feel like?
I felt like I was holding my breath. It was like, give me that bell. So
there was a strain.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay. Great, thank you. So we're gonna do it again. This time, what's a story of when you felt like you didn't fit? And you have some experience now. You know what this feels like. So notice if it feels different this time. Okay, we're gonna do 2 minutes again. You can go in a different order if you like. But we're gonna start now. I didn't give him any time to think. Oops. I can go first.
Okay.
I can choose my moment in the middle of my third year of my undergraduate degree program, where I was really straining to do well in the classes. I was in the materials engineering class, and I was doing all of the things that I thought I was supposed to be doing. I was like going to office hours, and I was asking colleagues for appropriate help, and I was, trying to learn from past homework assignments that were not the same homework assignment, and I was trying to go over the content of a lecture, and I was trying to, I was repeating all of the content again so that I could feel like I understood it, and I just could not get it. And I remember this moment where I suddenly learned or realized this revelation that faculty aren't taught how to teach, and that it might not be me. Like I had felt this profound, why is it that everybody else knows what's going on, is able to process all this information, can put it together and do an assignment, and I can't do that. And the moment where it's like, oh, it could be the instruction. It could be that it's not put together in a way that you are able to make sense of, and it doesn't mean that you're stupid or you're not able to do it. It just means that they have never learned better ways to teach. So I felt a sort of a resolution at that point, this tension of why is it that all my colleagues understand all of this and I don't, to still they could make sense of it. Oh, that's 2 minutes.
That's your escape.
So that was 2 minutes. Are you ready to switch? Let's reverse. Other side now. A new 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay, so one of the stories I feel like I didn't fit into the context very well was I think I took one class at Purdue as a PhD student. It was probably with Monica Cox, I guess. It's talking about all the policy issues, and I was not very sure why we should do this. I mean, we didn't explain very well that, other students were quite aware of the context of the American education, and all the policy documents were dry, and didn't have much time discussing the meaning of the policies, and I didn't know much about the context of all these documents, why the American government and also American people and educators, they were talking about these issues, why these issues were so important to my fellow students who were in the classroom. Most of them were Americans. We're talking about why these questions were so important to the research. I didn't know very well, so I asked critical questions. At the beginning, the questions were appreciated, but later the questions were becoming problematic in terms of the professor probably was not very much patient anymore by listening to the questions I raised. So, but I tried very hard. Then I was asking whether we could maybe we could talk about education policy issues in other contexts, not only in the American context. So I was sitting with a group of students who were also international students.
That's the time.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it felt antagonistic.
All right, folks. So, how did that round go for you?
She talked more.
She talked more? So is that different than the first time, or did it feel the same? Yeah.
It was easier.
It was easier. No, that's fine.
I'm a blurter. I'm a blurter.
It's all right. It's okay. It's all right. I'll come back to Dean. So
it felt easier for some reason, and I don't know why. I guess I just because you know what to expect. Yeah, yeah. But I ended up telling, when I was speaking, I told it was unfairly funny. It was like I should have.
Oh, because she couldn't respond.
Exactly.
She was trying not to laugh.
Right.
Got it. Just mean of you to do that.
It was inadvertent, but I was.
Thank you.
Are we doing a speaker?
Either way,
matter.
I hadn't set it up.
Do it as
So let's talk about let's talk about speaker. So did you feel like it was different as a speaker this time? Yes, I see some nods. What was different? Any of those of you who nodded here, and then I'll come to Chin, and then I'll come here.
I think when you're talking about some place where you didn't fit in, it just feels a little bit more serious, and so maybe some of those verbal cues you might give to someone who's telling a story where you're like, oh, tell me more. It's just a little easier to stay solemn, and maybe as the speaker, that's a little bit more about what you're going to expect from someone you're telling a story. That might be challenging for you to share, or a challenging situation.
So it was the content, the question itself was easier to, okay, thank you.
Maybe I was trained as a philosopher, so always good at complaining. So when I see something that didn't fit, I came up with a lot of experiences.
Many things to choose from.
Let's say anytime what I see, I fit into the context. I didn't have many good examples.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and there was someone else over here.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, okay, all right. How about as a listener? Yes.
It felt about the same for me, at least. I cannot resist nodding and things like that, and I said, sort of very quietly to myself.
So you're still self-monitoring, yeah? Dean, you wanted to say something as a listener.
So Amy, as a speaker in the second round, took your invitation to go silent, and
that's when
it was brutal.
Stressful.
And we did our best to maintain eye contact, and we started by slight diversions and returning. And we just eventually had to accept. I experienced that we accepted this isn't working interpersonally, and we
it's intense.
Relied on our table.
Intense.
I happened to look over at them, and they both looked.
Can you save us?
That is fascinating. So, any other speakers? Oh no, sorry, listeners. Any other comments about listening? Yes.
I think for me, the first one was hard, but this one was even harder because it was where we're talking about like tough, potentially hard experiences that we went through, and so it felt that much. I felt that much worse that I wasn't responding to what she was saying and wasn't asking probing questions or following up or words of support or whatever because we weren't.
So the sense of empathy that you wanted to show that you felt restrained from doing, right? Did anybody feel, so the tagline again is the autocratic management of time in the service of the democratic distribution of time. So there was no interruption. Everyone got the same amount of time to share their story. So in the sense that, and it was supposed to be a moment to liberate yourself from the feeling that you had to one-up the person, right? The person who spoke first, that the second person would somehow have to come up with something better. So I think it's interesting to do this. I encourage you to sort of adopt it in your classes, even if it's not about something like this. You can do it fairly quickly without the debrief. The instructions are all online. But the idea is that it is a pedagogy that brings different voices into the room where people are both have a chance to share and are listened to, and also a moment to think about what that relationship is like in the rest of life, right? So it becomes a moment to think about of yourself as a listener or as yourself as a speaker, and how you engage in those activities in other frames. So you get meta about this in this context, and you start adopting it, different behaviors potentially in other contexts about something else, okay? So I wanted to, yes?
I think I missed your point.
Okay.
And in fact, I couldn't repeat now why I'd want to do this in class. In the sense that, I mean, what I took away from it was the sense of, oh, this is what it feels like if you're not being heard. That was an important experience that I took away from the exercise. And again, with all respect for you, you know. And but you're asking us to basically interrupt our normal interpersonal behavior, where we give reinforcements and where we relate to each other, even though you may be silent for two. Like you're doing that, right?
Absolutely.
You're listening to me. You're showing me you're listening. So why would we suspend that?
Can anyone think of a reason why?
Yeah. It was an interesting experience, but...
Right. Anyone?
Because that was your point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's 2 points. One is the actual opportunity to talk about the question, right? And that you have time, because we're going to come back to the actual content of fitting or not fitting. Another reason was to demonstrate an alternative pedagogy that can be adopted in different ways in class. And in because I'm very conscious of facts, or the people are wanting tools. I use this as an opportunity to make sure that in a conversation that both students engage. So it's not just one person taking up all the time about that thing, that both people get to contribute, and that both the speaker and the listener become cognizant of the experience of speaking and listening, that they can then take to other speaking and listening opportunities in class. So while we do this as a moment in class, we also do all kinds of other group interactions. And how does the experience of having limited what you are able to perform change your experience as a listener or speaker in those other venues? So essentially I want to come back to you after we've done some other group conversations and say, do you do that differently, having done the serial testimony to start with, right? So that later on, does the behavior of speaking and listening change, and helping students who are not necessarily cognizant of their sort of cultural performance of listening and speaking, do they become more aware of it? Does that help?
No.
Okay.
No, I see your point of the speaking for without interrupting anybody else and things like that. But by short-circuiting the normal interpersonal behavior seems like a strange thing to do, and we all felt very uncomfortable with it. And that was a very interesting experience. You know?
Yeah.
If you want to make somebody feel like, what does it feel like to not be heard I think it's a great exercise.
So it's interesting you bring this up. I see some hands. I want to come to the hands.
Okay.
But over the times that I have had this experience also of feeling like, cut off.
Sure.
But I also, as a speaker, just talking with Chin over here, I feel a little liberated that I don't have to entertain my listener. That I can say what I think should be said, irrelevant of how it lands. I feel like sometimes it's worth making sure that I know that I've said something, having had a chance to say something, and I feel like I have the space to do that. I actually have 2 other people who had hands up, and then I will come to you.
Well, to maybe try to address Fool's question, I think we're all aware that in normal conversation, we shape ourselves to that conversation. We're different people when we interact with different people. We can adjust ourselves in minute ways, and maybe that is a reflection of the fact that there are power dynamics in conversation. And what this exercise does is it strips away the power dynamics, maybe some of the intersectionality dynamics, and gives 2 people an unadulterated opportunity to actually express themselves fully. And that's a worthy exercise in itself, just to reflect and consider how conversation can impede other people expressing themselves.
Thank you. There was another hand, right?
Yeah, I guess what you said about making students aware of the experience of speaking and listening made a lot of sense to me. So I agree that we've stripped away these normal interpersonal relationships or interactions, but maybe that exercise then informs those interactions. So in a classroom, I could see myself using this experience at the start of class and then seeing if it changes the nature of the discussion that follows, and that by having students think more about how they are communicating, both listening and speaking, that I would hope perhaps changes the way they do that when I'm allowing those normal interpersonal interactions.
Thank you.
I mean, I love the exercise, and one huge takeaway for me is to ask students to allow each other to speak for a certain time uninterrupted. I think that's extremely valuable, right? I mean, somebody said over there that we have a habit of sort of speaking over each other and things like that, and I'm guilty of that sometimes. And but to have, Serene not showing me any engagement, it almost felt like disrespectful.
Interesting. So I'll note also that different communities show their listening in different ways too, right? And so our students may be more engaged in our classes than we may know, but are not expressing it in the ways that we feel listened to, right? So that's something to maybe notice. Is that, am I in the same context as they are? In terms of, how do I know if they're engaged or not? Is it just because they're nodding? What if there's a place where they're not nodding, but they are super engaged? What does that look like? So it helps us problematize the maybe presumptions that we put on our students for how we see engagement. I would love to see how, when we break up into small groups, how you feel about that, like where you are liberated from these rules. How is the experience different? And in some ways, I think of it kind of like a fast. Fasting is not super fun, but it can change how you think about your relationship with food before and after, right? So during and after. So an exercise in metacognition, maybe. I'm going to take the content of you thinking about fitting and not fitting, and put away these notes, which are about serial testimony, and pick up these notes, which is about that. You may have had a whole bunch of different circumstances where you felt like you fit or you didn't fit. Okay, and I want to sort of expand your repertoire from what you talked about and what your partner talked about to include people who are sitting in classes who are coming from these contexts. So they're working students, maybe to support family at home. that they're transfer students who are coming to Mines with different expectations about what they're supposed to be doing there. Maybe they have little advising. They're trying to manage debt. They might be veterans, including combat veterans, now going to school with, essentially old high school students. They might be primary caregivers in some respect. They could have had a lot of experience with poverty or with violence at home. That might be even something that they go back to. They might be experienced with different kinds of harassment, microaggressions and harassment in a day-to-day setting, including having come from something where they were harassed on the street into your classroom. They might be handling major health issues. They might be commuting. I don't know. Do you have commuting students? Yes. Okay. So they've come for a long drive and that they have to go home. So given that those students are in your classrooms, what are the different, oh, wrong page. It's okay, I don't need that one. If your goal is to help all the students in your class learn with all these different shapes of lives, which have race, class, and gender dimensions involved in them, right? From a perspective of liberation, remember that fence at the beginning, where you're removing structures that get in their way. I want you to, we're going to do a little think, pair, share, where you think on your own to choose one of these classes of student, or another one that you know that you have in your class. I didn't put up students dealing with cognition and learning differences. I should have. Think what your ideal classroom or your ideal learning experience might be like for that class of student, just one. So I'm going to give you about a minute to think on your own, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes to share in your pairs with no restrictions about how you show you're listening. And then we're going to do a little report out, okay? So a little think on your own for a minute. Okay, I invite you to share some of those thoughts. Something about the group you chose and something about what your ideal environment might look like for that student or that group of students with the same partner you just spoke with, and then we'll have a bigger conversation. While I grab water. Ooh. It's beeping.
It's beeping.
I don't know if that's a thing. I'm going to go grab some
okay.
water.
已经关了。OK。
还有这个常识是怎么编的？这是家暴的，家暴的。